right. Hello, and welcome everybody. You are here this afternoon with Autistic Parents UK, and we have got a wonderful selection of speakers for you today, all talking about the book that they have collaboratively written together, supporting autistic people through pregnancy and childbirth. So we've got Hayley Morgan, Emma Durham, Karen Henry, and we've got the fabulous Sarah King from Marge as well. I'm just going to do a tiny little bit of housekeeping with you, a little bit of Who Are Autistic Parents UK, and then a tiny bit of housekeeping, and then I will vanish off again. I will be here virtually, but my face will disappear. So just for those of you who are new to Autistic Parents UK, we are a charity. We got our charity status almost a year ago now, and we've been running since 2020. We do all of these things for autistic parents that you can see on your screens now. So obviously we do webinars and we have live Q&As, and then we've got lots of peer support groups. Pretty much any format that you would want peer support delivered in, we can deliver it. So if you're an autistic parent yourself and you're looking for peer support, please come and find us. Or if you're working with autistic parents who would benefit from some peer support, then please come and find us. And then we do all of these things as well. We do offer professional training as well as all the other things you can see on the screen. And if there's anything you think we should be doing, then do let us know. We do like to work reflectively. So if there's anything you want from us, then let us know. So tiny bit of housekeeping, as I said. If you want to have your camera on, you are more than welcome to do so. It is nice when you're giving a talk to actually see some faces. So if you want to have cameras on, please do feel free to do so, but don't feel obligated if you're really not comfortable having your camera on the screen. Some people aren't. What we're planning to do with the talk today, Sarah's going to come in with an intro, and then the three authors of the book are going to talk through their little sections. If you've got any questions or queries as people are speaking, please do feel free to put it in the chat. And if it can be answered by somebody else, then it will be. And if it can be answered by the speaker, they'll do it when they finish their little section. And then if you've got any big questions, there's going to be time for that at the end. So please do keep your microphone muted until it's time for the Q&A. Right at the end of the session, just because it's ever so distracting as a speaker if you accidentally turn your microphone on and then we can hear rustling or vague conversations or EastEnders. So if you can keep it off just while the people are speaking, it helps the session run smoother. So we really would appreciate that. But as I say, it's lovely to see your faces. So if you want to have cameras on, that's very nice. I shall head off now. I will be here virtually. So if there's anything that you've got specific questions for me, I shouldn't imagine so, but if you have, I will be here, but I'm just going to turn my camera off and hand over to Sarah. Thanks very much.
Thank you so much, Ruth. Thanks for the welcome and for the information. That's really helpful. So welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm not going to say too much today, but I would just like to give a brief introduction. So I'm the chair of Marge, which is the Maternity and Autism Research Group, which is an organisation that's autistic-led and signpost research and resources for autistic people and health professionals around pregnancy, birth and early parenting. So if you're interested in finding out more, please do have a look at our website. The topic we're discussing today is really, really close to my heart as an autistic woman who has had children, and also my PhD is exploring the experiences of autistic people of maternity services and the staff who support them too. So I'm particularly excited to be introducing the webinar and hearing lots more about the information you're going to hear. So I'm shortly going to be handing over to the authors, Hayley Morgan, Emma Durham and Karen Henry. Hayley and Karen are also founding members of Marge. So we have come across each other, worked together before, haven't we? So it's really nice to see you here. This book launch it's an extremely welcome and timely addition to the resources available relating to supporting autistic people around maternity, pregnancy and early parenting. And I'd really urge you to read this book if you haven't read already. Historically, it's been such an underexplored area, an area where I'm not going to say too much about it now, but the the speakers will talk about the issues and the impact, and share their knowledge and expertise and experiences with you. It seems incredibly topical. There's a lot more work in this area that we're starting to see now. And at Marge, we're getting lots of requests for information from health professionals and autistic people about how to improve the experiences for autistic people. We're aware of lots of work happening to make very necessary change. There's work underway in individual trusts, and also autistic people and advocates supporting them are providing information to help increase understanding and to make these changes happen. So we hope you enjoyed this session. I'm going to hand you over, first of all, to Hayley Morgan. Hayley is an autistic mother, educator and advocate. Her passion is that of promoting equality of identity, self and access to healthcare for autistic parents. Hayley's currently finishing her PhD on the autistic birth experience, and she'll soon be presenting her data from autistic birthing people, birth partners and midwives who have helped autistic people. So we would ask that you put any questions, please, in the chat. We're happy to answer questions at the end of each session in the chat, and then we will be taking questions live at the end of the session. So Hayley, I'd love to hand over to you, please. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. I'm just going to share my screen to get my PowerPoint up. So there's the jazzy front there. Sorry, let me just get the view sorted. Slideshow. There we go. There's all the beautiful photos all maxed out for your screens. So I thought I'd start my discussion today talking about how I got to this point. And sorry, I was distracted by the ping pong. And now I've got echolalia, which if you want to ask about autistic communication, you can ask about that. And it's in the book. But these pictures are some of the most beautiful ones ever taken about my life. And when I look back on them, I see my journey, and I see instances in the tiny details where I realize I was an undiagnosed autistic person. When I look at these pictures, I'm not just looking at my children, I'm looking at me becoming a mother, but learning I'm autistic at exactly the same time. I realized during my first pregnancy, I was somewhat different. I didn't know what that different meant. My sister-in-law shared a blog by Tanya Marshall, I think. It was something of a 40-point checklist. And when I read through the characteristics of how it may look different in females or female presenting people, then I just felt tick, 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 and it really resonated. So I decided to self-identify at first, and once that got quite assimilated, I felt quite comfortable in my identity. I decided to pursue a diagnosis then, which I had when I was very, very pregnant with I had my assessment when I was very pregnant with my second child. And I got diagnosed shortly after my second child was born. And I felt that the difference between feeling different but not understanding why, and then being more confident in my identity as an autistic person on my second birth, I found the difference in terms of how empowered I felt and how secure in myself I felt was huge between my two births. And just after I had given birth to my second, and I was learning that I was autistic, and I always have been, a course popped up on my social media somewhere, a local course in South Wales in Swansea University. They were running a master's in autism and related conditions. So I went along with a tiny baby, and I thought, yeah, okay, why not? I love a bit of science. I want to learn more about what autism is and what it means to me and others. So I signed up to that. And it was really, really helpful in terms of looking at policy and law, reflecting on experiences, lived experiences. And I found that towards the end, each essay was getting more specific to trying to untangle my experience and what that may mean for other autistic people giving birth. And I was told that there was a kind lady from the same town as me who was doing her dissertation on the same topic. And I think I approached Emma. I'm not sure. I can't remember who approached who at first, but that kind of fades into the background. Ever since we met, with this shared passion for this topic. We've just grown together, we've presented together, and we've wrote this book, and this book is our joint baby with Karen. When I was writing my dissertation, Karen's name was one of the few, if not the only person out there looking at training for midwives and specific autism care in maternity services. And I remember writing Henry 2017, Henry this, Henry that. And the fact that I now know Karen as a friend and a peer is still a bit pinch me. The fact that these two absolute legends decided to write a book with me and help, I'm just honoured, I really am. So thank you. Thank you for doing that. Sorry, I got strangely emotional then. So the next slide. So yes, there it is in all its reality is the book. So the reason I wanted to do it is kind of the same reason that I wanted to do a PhD. They were both a special interest, a passion of mine during the MSc, but I also decided in lockdown with a toddler and a 4-year-old that it would be a really good idea if me and Emma wrote a book. And Emma agreed. She thought, yeah, I'm homeschooling in a pandemic. Why not? Let's write a book. And we did. And it's because of, on paper, there is a disproportionate balance of the research looking at the autistic birth experience. And also autistic characteristics or profiles, wherever you want to call them. We have a population that is just as heterogeneous as any other. We are as different as neurotypical people. Which is funny because I don't think you could write a book saying supporting neurotypical people through pregnancy and childbirth, because mainstream care is exactly that, and it's the default. And also because we've got our own experiences, we wanted to have autistic people on board as well, their input and using the data. So it's very much for autistic people by autistic people. So the background is I've discussed my diagnosis, but also I'm only speaking for myself here, but a lot of autistic people like myself have a lot of co-occurring conditions. And autism is one of the few identities, profiles, whatever you want to call it, diagnosis, that affects medically in other ways. It affects communication, it can affect education, lifespan. It's very, I do think it's very unique in that sense, in terms of effect across the lifespan. And there's a growing sense of community and identity these days, especially with social media and the younger generation. So my background was linguistics, very methodical and practical in that sense, and words are the most important thing to me, and I decided to collate them all into a book. I've also decided to approach with something of a medical model, looking at a disability as well, because despite the most enlightened people or people who I've got to know as midwives, I find that they're not necessarily believing that birth is inherently a medical or hospital event. I don't want to put words in your mouth, but it currently is that for a lot of people. So I decided to put some aspect of medical accountability in terms of the research into the book, but with the pinnacle, the most important priority being patient voice, our voice. But I wanted to approach the professionals with a social model of disability. I wanted to approach it that we are not deficits of everybody else, that this is the way we're doing it, and hey, clear communication, different planning, that there are ways that we could bend, taking things with an autism specific approach can in some cases help everybody. So the aims were to improve, that's what we wanted to improve the experience for autistic mothers. We wanted to inform maternity care professionals and everybody involved about autistic characteristics and what that snapshot of birth could look like and how they could intersect. We wanted to offer practical recommendations And I think that is where Emma's contribution, one of her many, many, many contributions, one of her chapters, I think that is one of the, if not the strongest part of the book, is the training package that Emma wrote for midwives to take on midwifery training, ideally with autistic voice. And it's very practical as well. So again, as I mentioned, I did the master's, the data that really propelled me to write the book and to self-fund the PhD I'm currently doing was the data that was shared from around 250 respondents in the survey was absolutely harrowing. And as some of you may know, autistic people are very hyper empathetic and have a very strong sense of justice. And I really couldn't let this stuff rot away in a Word file on a USB drive. I felt like this needed action. So Emma and I have taken action in a variety of ways, and so has Cara. And I think, yeah, that is, sorry, nerves are getting the better of me today. But this is a word cloud generated from my MSc. And again, the difference in perceiving disability, perceiving autism is really different in how we're looking at some of these, when you look at some of these quotes. So when someone was absolutely quiet, they were seen as a model patient, but to them, they were deeply traumatized. So who do I think would be interested in this book? Autistic parents and anybody supporting them, anybody that could be involved with maternity care practice, social workers, caseworkers, counsellors, health visitors, anybody directly after the birth and during the early years even, because I think it will be important to understand how the difference of pregnancy and childbirth can have an impact later on. And in terms of academia, I mean, obviously I would say this, but I think it would be useful for anyone because when we break it down to things like pain, communication, any training about autistic people needs to have our voice on board. I think it could be a good practice model for any other type of medical intervention or critical autism studies or so on. And I am aware I've kind of burned through this a little bit quickly because I'm nervous. But overall, the chapters, we've got background and history. We've got the intersectionality and feminism, which was hugely important to how we're looking at birth and how we're looking at autism. And I think the next step would absolutely be to look at how different intersections interact with the autistic birth experience, because as 3 white ladies, it's very limited. Well, it's not very limited. Yeah, coexisting conditions is a chapter on its own because some of these are, you're more likely to have very real medical conditions that you likely need to be accountable for. Pain and sensory differences is a huge interest of mine as well. And I did a systematic review on this topic. And I was fascinated by it, and it kind of resonated with my own experiences and experiences in the community as well. So I added that to the book. And with my background in linguistics and my obsession with trying to decode this neurotypical world that I found myself in, communication has long been an obsession, trying to decode it. So I added my perspective there onto that chapter. And Emma's chapters on advice for professionals and the practical strategies, these are something that this incredible person came up with. And I don't want to talk all over Emma's chapters, but I can't wait to hear more because, yeah, sorry. So here is the blurb. Whether you've read it or not, just to recap, if you have read it, actually, do you think that we met the objective of the blurb? That would be interesting to you. We've had some fantastic feedback so far from people who have read it and publishers and people who were just happy that this book exists. And we won't know sales figures for a while, and that is not the metric that we live and die by, but it's really interesting to hear feedback of all kinds. But we definitely identified a gap, not just from our own experiences, but from literature as well. And I think we've done a really good job in addressing that gap. And I always add a picture of my cute babies to distract people, because I don't think I would have done this if it wasn't for them. If I hadn't had them and become a mother, I wouldn't know about it. I wouldn't know about my own strengths either. And the babiest one there is now telling everybody to write a book. He told his friend who came over for tea last week that his friend was saying how much he loved chili heatwave Doritos and Spider-Man. So my 7-year-old said, well, you should write a book about that if you love it so much. So my 7-year-old is telling everybody to write a book. And he asked when we went to Waterstones to get my copy and take a picture for the photo album. He asked if I was a celebrity, and I said no, so he's quite disappointed. So if you can tell more people to buy the book so I don't disappoint my 7-year-old, that would be really, really helpful. Obviously, his review is the most important. But yeah, I think I just end on that happy note talking about my babies and the reason I did all of this. So I'll stop sharing my screen because I think you've seen enough of how cute they are. But yeah, thanks. I'm still around. I'm just going to mute myself because I'm sure everybody's sick of hearing my voice.
Not at all, Hayley, and that was really lovely to hear. And you may have felt nervous, but that didn't come across in what you presented. So I just want to say, for me, just reflections on what you've shared. I always think it's really powerful to hear the personal story. I think and it was really obvious what had driven you to do the work you're doing, the book and your research, and the other work you're involved in is about making a difference for other people, and that's really powerful. And I particularly like to hear the warmth and shared experiences between yourself and Karen and Emma, and I think it's really important and really powerful, that kind of shared experience, autistic to autistic understanding. There's something very, very special about that, and clearly that's worked really well for you with developing the resource that you have and the work that you've been doing. So it was lovely to hear about that. So thank you for sharing it. I think your points about the broad impact and the lifelong impact of being autistic and how it impacts in such a different way than some other things do is really important. And with maternity, obviously it's something that impacts on so many areas of your life, doesn't it? It's an ongoing thing and impacts on everything. It's one of the biggest things that you can do in your life that makes a change to how you do things and all those other things. So I think that's a really important point too. So it's great to hear. So thank you so much. We are going to take questions if anyone has them in person at the end. If you do have questions though, please feel free to keep putting them in the chat and we'll answer them in the chat as we go along. But now I'm going to hand over to Emma. And so Emma Derman is co-director of Autside Education and Training, a company that specialises in training, consultancy and support for a wide range of families and professionals. Emma has also worked closely with Welsh Government via ASD Info Wales and the Integrated Autism Service. She was intrinsic to the creation of the recently launched Welsh Government Guidance on Autism and Housing, and is a coordinator on a pan-European Erasmus Plus project on autism and employment alongside the National Autistic Society. So welcome, Emma. I'll hand over to you.
Thanks, Sarah. And thanks, Hayley, as well for your words. So I've got quite a few slides today. Anyone that knows me will know that I do not summarize well, okay? So I could talk about this topic all day, but I promise I will try to just touch upon key points. However, I haven't cut the slides down because even if I don't manage to get through all of them in my allotted time, the PDF will be shared with you all at the end, and so you can still have a look at that as well. But we shall see. So Autistic Birth from the Inside Out was actually the original title of the book. I remember, Hayley and I were sort of both working on this, and it was very strange that we hadn't really come across each other before. We live a few streets away from each other. So given the really small amount of people working in this kind of topic area, that's quite unusual. And also I had been friends with Hayley's sister when I was younger and things, so there was a lot of links there. But I had started the masters, and my first sort of foray into looking at this topic was basically a reflective practice type of essay, which was in my lived experience module. So the module of the Masters of Science in Autism was on, you know, your experience of living with autism, whatever it may be, as a person, an autistic person or a professional. And I had actually only been diagnosed as autistic the week that I was accepted to university. So doing the Masters in Autism was like a really intensive post-diagnostic course for me, is the only way that I can really describe it. So this was the first time I'd kind of looked at this, but I had given birth several years before to my only child, and I had developed post-traumatic stress disorder after that experience. Now, on paper, my birth was straightforward. It was less than 24 hours. There were no major complications as such. You know, my life was never in danger. My baby's life was never in danger, but I was absolutely broken after it. There's no other way to put it. And I decided to sort of look at this because I had been stuck in a loop of replaying the experience over and over and over. And I thought, well, now that I know I'm autistic, can I look at this a bit differently? And I had started by looking at what I could have done differently. And actually, it was my tutor that said to me, well, what about what the midwives could have done differently? And I said, yeah, but this is supposed to be about reflection, about what I've learned and what I could have done. He said, yeah, but do you think they failed you? And that was what triggered it all. And the more that I looked into this topic, the more that I found that I was very much not alone. And there was very little out there at the time. I was talking to Sarah before we started, and you know, I was saying that was literally, I could find nothing when I first started. And sort of 3 years later, by the time I did my dissertation, you know, Sarah was one of the only names that came up. There were maybe 2 or 3 names out there at that point. Hayley had approached me to speak at Let's Talk Birth with her. And that's when we started really co-delivering and collaborating on the subject. And I remember we kept saying, there needs to be more out there about this. There needs to be a book. And I remember one day I said, well, let's stop waiting, Hayley. We keep talking about the book. Let's just literally log on and pitch it. And we literally, like, I think we met at our local beefeater, and we literally sat there with a laptop connected to their Wi-Fi and did the pitch there and then together. And something I was really keen on, as Hayley was saying, you know, autistic people have this really keen sense of social justice. I really wanted to cover intersectionality and feminism as a core part of the book, because that had come up as well. You know, that it is a feminist issue, and also the multiplication of disadvantage that I was seeing, you know, from a socioeconomic perspective, from a cultural and racial perspective, all of those things were coming in. And, you know, we were very aware in writing the book that we are 3 white women, you know, but we wanted to still highlight that, you know, people of color were being really kind of overlooked in this process as well. So if you were autistic and transgender, if you were autistic and Black, then the levels of disadvantage that you're going to face were multiplied. So we really wanted that in there. Also, I am quite, you know, politically furious is really the only way to put it, I suppose. And this was really great for me to be able to sort of broadly say that this is not okay for how we are treating disabled people in this country. and across the world, really. So there is a bit in there about that as well. A little bit about me before I move on then as well. As I've said, you know, I did the Masters of Science that Hayley did as well in autism related conditions at Swansea University Medical School. But Hayley did the research route and I did the work-based portfolio route. So that was another reason we thought, great, we've both got like different pieces of the pie here that we can bring together. I was already sort of working in training at that point as part of Outside. And so I thought, right, I'm going to create a training package specific to this. As I said, I was late diagnosed. So it's coming up for about 8 years ago now. I was diagnosed with autism and ADHD. I've also got a teenager who's 16 now, who's autistic and has ADHD as well. I've got a lot of other co-occurring conditions. I always joke I was collecting letters after my name before I ever went to university, because all of the usual suspects are there, you know, CFS and fibro and all of those things. I've also, you know, struggled for a long time with my mental health, anxiety, depression, things like that. And I knew going through the birth process that that was going to be an issue. And I tried to get help at the time relating to that, even not knowing I was autistic. And really, I did not get the support that I needed. So we talk a lot about being people-centered, person-centered, and needs-based care. And in reality, I find that very often doesn't happen. So that's another reason for all of this. So I do a wide range of things. I've done a lot of work in criminal justice, in housing, pretty much any topic you can think about. But my first passion is healthcare. Mainly, you know, stemming quite selfishly, I suppose, at first from my own experiences of really feeling like I was so disadvantaged my whole life in healthcare and then specifically in birth. So, as I said, lots of things in my session. I may not get to them all, but I will try. So, as I said, when I first started looking into this, there was absolutely nothing. And what I could find, there was a huge amount of an emotional labor involved in reading it. Because, you know, trigger warning here, again, a lot of it was ableist. It was very much looking at autism as a deficit. And if you typed in autism, pregnancy, autism, birth, a lot of it focused on prevention and what causes autism and all of these things, which was just horrible. Why were we missing this topic, though? Well, for one thing, because we didn't seem to believe that disabled people could have sex or reproduce, and particularly where there was a developmental difference, or something that would affect the way that we function cognitively. So things like autism, learning disability, all of those things, there's a huge amount of infantilization there. And so that had really, I think, been a big factor in stalling anybody kind of looking into this. It also meant that conversations weren't being had with autistic people about healthy sexual relationships, family planning, all of these things. And lots of autistic people have gone undiagnosed or misdiagnosed. You know, so there are a huge range of conditions that people get misdiagnosed with. For autistic women, you see huge amounts of, you know, bipolar or borderline personality disorder, which can coexist, but often there's still diagnostic overshadowing there. We're seeing huge waves of people coming forward now for diagnosis after having their own autistic children. When I started delivering training about 8 years ago for families, I started to see signs of this. Now I'm having lots of those people saying, I've just had my diagnosis. And actually we do private diagnostic assessments at Outside now. So I'm qualified in ADOS myself, and you know, we just see huge amounts of people coming forward after having their own children or grandchildren even. So there's been this huge hidden cohort of autistic people who are becoming or have become parents without specialised support. And we also need to think about the wider family and support network. I know that in my family, the impact was huge. You know, it impacted my partner massively. The way that I went through my birth experience, the trauma that I had, and how ill I was afterwards. I mean, he couldn't work for 9 months. He couldn't leave me alone for 9 months. I was very unwell. And so there was a lot of strain on him as well. Trigger warning, as I said, a lot of the research that was out there was, you know, really negative stuff, and it wasn't actually relating to supporting autistic people through pregnancy and childbirth, or how they could make the experience better, or how to navigate the hospital environment, or any of that. It was really harmful things. And actually, when I was sort of, as I said, first starting off, there was some research starting at Cambridge University as well. I read some research that was, you know, hugely upsetting to me. And I remember one day, you know, just thinking, oh, I need to take a break from researching this, because I'm quite good at compartmentalizing, but it was just too much. As I said, we often infantilize people, and also we tend to think that differences in development affect somebody across all aspects of their maturity and their development. So actually not realizing that somebody can have a multiple spectrum of ages within one person. So you might cognitively be age 13, but you might you might chronologically be age 13, as in years since you've been born, but you might be cognitively quite advanced, but you might be physically perhaps delayed in meeting some milestones, and you might have social and emotional delays. So it's not as simple as, or, you know, somebody's functioning at a certain age level. It's a lot more complicated than that. One of the areas that we see this in a lot when I work with families is puberty, for example. And that's why I was really keen to include that family planning aspect as well. We know that autistic women were often diagnosed more readily where their autism was considered severe, i.e. where they had high support needs, where they had a significant language impairment or were non-verbal, or they had an accompanying intellectual disability. And so, you know, people that were out there sort of without that support, and they were managing on the surface, and they were having families, we did not recognize them at all. What we also see is that parents often take on the biggest role in supporting and educating their autistic children, teens, young adults, and even their adult offspring, which can mean that it's really difficult for them to have open and honest conversations about sex, sexual health, family planning as well. And actually, the level of depth and explicit detail that autistic people may need when learning about those things is really important. So there is a bit in the book as well about, you know, kind of how we need to promote healthy relationships, how we need to actually acknowledge that sensory differences play a huge role in our sexual experience and things like that as well. Another trigger warning, there are a few trigger warnings. I should really just put a blanket trigger warning on the whole session, to be honest, but for many of you that are here, you will have lived through similar experiences, I'm sure, and you'll be aware of what I'm talking about. But autistic people are at a disparity in healthcare. In fact, autistic people are at a disadvantage across all of the wider determinants of health. So housing, healthcare, education, employment. And the worst thing is, or perhaps the best, if we're being hopeful, is that it doesn't need to be that way. This is not about a deficit inherent to autism. This is about societal barriers. The fact that we find healthcare so difficult to access, the fact that we are more likely to have co-occurring conditions, and that we are more likely to develop mental health conditions, is not necessarily a foregone conclusion in many cases. And so the hope is that if we can improve those things, then we can reduce the overall barriers that autistic people are facing. Kind of touched upon it already, but if you are from another background that also faces barriers in these kinds of areas, then you will also kind of have that disadvantage almost compounded. And that is also the same for people who identify as women. You know, women are at a disadvantage in healthcare, along as the kind of stereotype of hysterical woman kind of being played out in healthcare. There are a lot of coexisting conditions out there. Not going to go through them all, but you know, they can all impact the birth experience in some way or another as well. Now, obviously, pregnancy is difficult for many people. It's a very emotional time. It's a time of great change, of reflection. And I remember when I first started looking into this, kind of discussing it in my master's, and somebody saying, well, I don't see why you need training for midwives on this. Can't, you know, just get people to watch one born every minute or something like that? And I think I literally went, you know, face palm. Because I was sort of not dismissing that there are challenges for any woman at all. I was just saying that there can be different specific challenges for autistic people as well. Sensory changes, for example, I knew I was pregnant a lot earlier. It was like 3.5 weeks, and I literally could feel changes happening in my body. So that is, you know, related to that interoceptive sensory difference potentially. Anecdotally, I've seen a lot of autistic people and women reporting that they have tocophobia. Certainly with my teen, they have that a lot. It's a fear of being pregnant, or of being around pregnant people, or of witnessing pregnancy in extreme cases, you know, and that can have a real impact because sometimes they really want to have biological children, but they're really afraid of the process. And even if you're not actually, you know, experiencing tocophobia, you may, like me, have a phobia around healthcare and clinical environments. So that kind of is really difficult for some people as well. And the other thing that can be challenging is that there is, you know, a real struggle with continuity of care. So we needed a lot more enhanced information, essentially. As Hayley said, there is also the difference in pain. And for me, that was true. I sort of turned up to the maternity ward and said, I'm in absolute agony and I need you to help me. And they went, it's going to get a lot worse. Go home and don't come back for several hours, you know? And they were kind of dismissing where I was in my labour based on just my outward presentation. So that can actually be quite dangerous in a range of scenarios if people are not actually acknowledging our pain. And even if it isn't to the level that it becomes dangerous for our health, it is obviously very distressing, and not a nice thing to kind of to go through. So that is not good enough. And there's very little evidence out there. But there are little bits of evidence starting to show that some autistic people may react differently to medications and analgesia. So that needs to be researched further as well. So this is a word cloud from my dissertation. Lots of the words that were coming up when I was researching the birth experience, not necessarily just for autistic women, but for women in general who had kind of encountered trauma, these were the things that were coming up. And one of the biggest words there, I think, is allowed. And Hayley and I, we were not experts in birth, you know, at all. We were coming at this from the perspective of knowing a bit about autism. And when we went to our first birth conference, it was a really kind of flashpoint for us. And I remember at one point listening to the chair of Birth Rights, which is a charity that promotes human rights in childbirth, speak. And she said, you are not allowed to do anything. Nobody has the right to allow you or disallow you. And that was the first time I'd had that belief challenged, because I had been saying I wasn't allowed to have a home birth. I wasn't allowed to do this. I was like, oh my gosh, the idea that I didn't have to be allowed that I didn't have to ask permission. That was huge. So it was a really emotional day, I think, for both of us. And, you know, my birth experience, I think I was the most scared I've ever been during the process. I didn't know what to expect. I didn't know what was coming. The environment was sensory overloading. There were people in and out of the room, and actually a lot of them were very critical of me and dismissive of me. So in this very vulnerable state, I felt like I was surrounded by hostility, and that really impacted me massively. Some of the things that happened, I won't go into detail right now, but just the way that I was treated. I remember at one point screaming and screaming and screaming, and the midwife bending down and whispering into my ear, and I perceived it as very sinister. She said, "Well, you can scream all you want, but you'll only lose your voice." And it was just horrifying. I can't describe how it felt in that moment. And so when I started looking into PTSD in childbirth, I was like, wow, this is a massive issue. It's actually really common. And it doesn't matter if a health professional would say, yes, you were in danger, you know, your health was in danger, or any of that, because I kept thinking, what am I complaining about? My birth on paper was not traumatic. You know, I wasn't in danger, but it's the perception of danger and threat that's key in developing trauma and going into that fight, flight, or freeze response. There are factors as well for developing PTSD following childbirth, which actually correlate with autistic people and neurodivergent people experiencing some of those factors at higher levels than the general population. So having a history of sexual trauma, a lack of perceived social support, higher anxiety, or actually your childbirth experience being more negative than expected. And I also found out, well, PTSD is common in partners after childbirth as well. And often that's because they don't feel like they have any power or say or inclusion in the process. I'm not going to touch upon this now because of times, but there are extra slides in here. I think that globally, and even more so since I created this PowerPoint, actually, there is a focus on women's reproductive rights. And in some cases, they feel increasingly under threat. I know in America, it is a massive debate at the moment. But generally, women are just conditioned to believe that birth trauma is another part of the raw deal of motherhood. You know, you've got a healthy baby, that's all that matters. How dare you complain about it? And the way that we talk about consent, choices, autonomy, and maternity care needs to evolve systematically and societally. And this is for every woman or female presenting person or autistic parent or co-parent that goes through the process. But I think that autistic women are additionally kind of vulnerable. I've already kind of talked about that. So then going into this, my first thought was, well, we need specialist midwives because they have them for different issues, you know, so we need them for autistic women. And then the more I looked into that, obviously we all know that a big part of the reasons we're disadvantaged is because of a lack of funding, resources, training, time, etc. But also things like staff retention, rotas. What if there wasn't a midwife available? What if they were on, you know, long-term sickness leave? What if they were on holiday? What if there was only one and there were two autistic birthing people, you know? So I thought, okay, well, we need to tier this training package so that we have a specialist there, you know, but also that everybody from the receptionist that books you in to, you know, every single person, the ultrasound technician that does your scans, every single person needs to know about this because they all have a role. Also, okay, we can't completely modify the clinical environment, but there are things that we can do. You know, I gave birth in a birthing centre, which was kind of the only way that I felt comfortable. I wanted a home birth. At the time, I wasn't allowed, as I say, but the birthing centre was much more like you had your own room. There was one bathroom between 2 rooms, and the most important thing for me was that my partner could stay with me the whole time. Because the idea of them saying, right, ward hours are over, you know, you need to go home now and leave mum and baby here, was just horrifying to me, honestly. It didn't work out quite like that. I got transferred to a local hospital because I was in so much distress, mainly. Gave birth there, but I begged to be sent back to the birth centre so that my partner could stay with me. And luckily that did happen. But, you know, things like making the room less clinical, bringing in some favourite things, perhaps having a playlist or an audiobook, or, you know, things like that, dimming the lights, muting sort of machines that don't need to be on full volume, trying to make it, you know, as comfortable as possible is really important and can make the world of difference. And something that should have really been happening anyway is just compassion and respect, and just, I felt like I wasn't treated like a human being. I felt like I was a problem, and that the more that I asked for help, the more that I was a problem. And that was not necessarily just about being autistic, you know. Even without specialist understanding of autism, I think the midwives could have done a better job with that in my case. And that is not me being critical of midwives as a whole. That was my personal experience at the time. I also thought, okay, well, what about adjusting to new parenthood? Because for me, adjusting to new parenthood was not easy. I felt like I just needed to go home and have a rest to recover, but my home didn't exist anymore. It had been ripped out from under me because now there was this whole new little person in it that I didn't know. I didn't know them, you know, and they had changed my whole life, my whole routine. They were really putting attacks on my sensory needs as well. And as much as I absolutely, you know, I could not love my child more than I do. I don't think it's physically possible, but it was hugely challenging. And I remember things like just looking at the bottle sterilizer and bursting into tears, because the thought of trying to read how it worked or process that, my executive functioning was so low. And this was the case, you know, my partner and my closest friend were having to be here to not just make me meals, but remind me to actually eat each spoonful of them. I was so burnt out. So yeah, so, you know, I was dealing with all of this birth trauma, and also, you know, the midwives were kind of assessing my mental health based on mainstream indicators of well-being, or what they thought meant well-being. So in my notes, it said no visitors today. And actually my partner and I had discussed it and said no visitors for sort of a day, you know, after the birth, until late in the next day, because we wanted that time to ourselves, and we knew that ahead of time, you know. But they were kind of judging my mental health based on how many people were in and out of my room, and had actually put the next day, lots of visitors today, smiley face, you know. And that to me was no indicator of how I was doing. So that's not a good way to kind of assess somebody's mental health after birth either. And then moving on to parenting, you know, I parent differently. I think I had mapped out all of the big conversations and big decisions in parenting before I even decided to have a child, you know. I knew how I was going to deal with religion and sexuality and education and, you know, all of this. It was in my head. And so I'm a very conscious parent, is what I would call it. And that's no criticism of other people's parenting. It's just different. I think that I've always treated my child like a mini human rather than an infant. So I've always talked to them kind of on a level of mutual respect and equality, I guess. And not everybody does that, and sometimes you get criticized for that as well. So parenting as well is a big difference there. Something that Hayley had talked about was not just, you know, autistic parents having autistic children, but autistic parents having neurotypical children. Well, they're facing similar challenges, but flipped as neurotypical parents of autistic children, and yet that hasn't even kind of come into the sphere of consciousness. Sorry, I am wrapping up, guys. I know that I'm coming to the end of my time. I'm conscious of that. So you've also got undiagnosed parents who may be coming to terms with the fact that they're autistic as well. So let's just add that one in as well. Because pregnancy can be a flashpoint for understanding that, and becoming a parent can be. And so, you know, midwives and health visitors and all of these people need to understand all of that. And we need to create safe spaces, because sometimes groups for parents of autistic children are not always safe spaces for autistic people. And so that is really important as well. Key takeaways then is just summarizing what I've said, really. All of this was really massively driving factors in the book, that we needed, you know, basic knowledge, but we also needed specialist knowledge. We needed to identify where the challenges were and then look at how we could, you know, remedy some of them or improve them. And I don't think one book is by any means going to do it, but I know that the three of us have really tried our hardest to fit as much in there as we can. And hopefully there will be more training as a result of this. And I think what's really important to remember is that autistic people can be fantastic parents. You know, we have our own challenges, and some of us need extra support, or we need to do it differently. But actually, you know, everyone has the right to a family life, and we need to support everyone to be able to do that. And as we were saying earlier, what's good for autistic people is often good for everyone. So I didn't know I was autistic going through birth, but the things in this book would have helped me. They would have helped me with my anxiety if you just took that as a standalone diagnosis. So all of that empathy and knowledge and understanding means better outcomes for everyone. Thank you all very much for listening. Sorry I took a little bit longer. It's a lot of info, I know. You can kind of see more about us on our on my blog, Autism Tinted Glasses, or you can find us at outsideeducation.co.uk. Hayley's also been on some of the outcasts that we've done, which are freely available autistic-led podcasts. Okay, thanks everyone.
Thank you so much, Emma. I don't know where to start with responding to this, because you've covered just so many aspects of the experience. There were lots of positive comments coming in the chat, which I'm sure you'll see in a moment, very impactful. I recognise so much of this on a personal level, your experience and my experiences. There's a lot of common ground there, and the ongoing trauma and the impact. And also that is in my research data too, that I'm analysing now. You know, just so much common ground with what you've shared. I'm just reflecting on the impact as well of the compound issues of disadvantage generally that you talked about, and how that can have such a significant effect on the experience for people. And I think it's really important that people supporting autistic people understand that. The other thing I wanted to pick up on was that case for specialist midwives. And one of the things that came out really strongly in the data I collected, so, you know, and examining, is that autistic midwives and autistic health professionals, or those that had a really direct personal experience, really had that visceral insight into how to support an autistic person. And they were often seen as the in-house expert. So they were the person that everybody in their organisation went to, if they'd been open about it, to then get advice and support. So coming back to that idea of emotional labour, there's a whole another layer of that when you're thinking about autistic health professionals too, and the impact on them. So I just wanted to reflect on that. But I could really just say absolutely 100% to everything you just said, which would probably be quicker. But I would love to go through and kind of comment on all of it, but there's not time right at the moment. But thank you so much. Really amazing, amazing sharing there. And I really appreciate hearing all of that. Hayley's just saying here, can you all see why I wrote a book with this amazing woman? Well, yes, I can. So yeah, and there's lots of comments in the chat. Please do have a look. Thank you so much. As I said earlier, please, any questions in the chat, or we'll take questions at the end. We've had a few people join us while we've been talking, so I just wanted to make that clear for people. There will be a chance to ask questions. So I'm now going to come to Karen Henry. So Karen is a lecturer in midwifery at the University of Suffolk and a registered midwife. As an autistic mother, her midwifery practice was fueled by a passion to create accessible maternity care for other autistic women. Karen has studied autism at master's level, has published in several journals, and was awarded a Florence Nightingale Foundation Scholarship, which she used to design and implement maternity support plans for autistic people. Karen also has experience of being a linked midwife for autism and learning disabilities in the hospital setting. So over to you, Karen. Welcome.
Thanks, Sarah. And I just wanted to say, like, thank you to Emma and Hayley, obviously, for sharing their stories today, because like, sharing stories is just so important. I'm just going to share my screen. I've literally only got 3 slides and they're all pictures of me. So hang on a minute. Let me just try and do this. Okay, so you should be able to see just some lovely pretty plants, because I thought they were pretty. But what I'm going to do is share my journey to writing this book, because I think that, like, obviously listening to everybody's stories, it just gives us an understanding, rather than, you know, I could sit here and go, you know, autism is this, autism is that, but actually I think sharing, like, stories is really powerful. So I'm Karen. I'm a registered midwife, and I've been a midwife for 6 years. And obviously, as Sarah said, I'm a lecturer in midwifery at the University of Suffolk as well, and I've been there for about 1.5 years now. I'm married, and I've got 5 like grown-up children, and I've also got 3 grandchildren. And I think my autism journey really started when I had my 4th son. That's him there on the, like, the one with his fingers like this on the camera. But he was just so different from my other children, and he was going through the process of being diagnosed with autism or assessed for autism, and the paediatrician kept she just one day said to me, have you ever thought about having an assessment yourself? And I was like, oh no. And she said, well, I've been, like, you know, giving you hints over the last few sessions, but I think it would be worth you having an assessment yourself. And that came from, you know, her asking me questions of, you know, does Alexander like this, or does Alexander like that? And I'm like, oh, actually, like, we have a routine because I have a routine. So it was really quite apparent to her that I was also autistic, but it hadn't even dawned on me. So I was diagnosed myself in 2009, and then later on my daughter was also diagnosed as autistic as well. And as I was reading, you know, books for my, you know, to support my children, I started just recognizing myself in these books, and I felt quite comforted by that. And I then, you know, at the time when I was diagnosed, I was a mother of 5 children, but actually I was stuck in my routines, and I rarely left the house, and I only did so for my children or with my children, or I kind of immersed myself so much in motherhood that I really didn't know who I was. So I set on this journey of actually, you know, understanding myself and, you know, why I was the way I was. And so I like joined a you can tell I haven't rehearsed any of this. I joined a like a support group for, you know, parents of autistic children. And what I learned was actually it's okay to be me. And, you know, I might have all of these, you know, issues and all of these challenges, you know, that I don't like going out, or I don't really mix well with people. But actually it's okay, because now I have this label that actually explains quite a few things about me. And so I then started to actually feel comfortable being myself. So I thought, you know, what do I want for my life? What do I, you know, what if I could have anything, what would I really want to be? And I thought, actually, you know, I've already got what I wanted. I've always wanted to be a mom, and this is, you know, this is who I am. But, you know, my youngest child was looking to go to, you know, going to start school. And I thought, oh gosh, what am I going to do? And I thought, oh, I want to be a midwife. And so, you know, I joined this support group for autistic, you know, parents of autistic children. And then I was invited to go to a craft group, and I was like, okay, I'll be brave and I'll go. And I learned to crochet, and I still do that. And then I thought, oh, okay, I really want to be a midwife. So I, you know, applied for college to do an access course, because when I left school, I literally had one GCSE, because I'd found going to school really difficult, and I'd found exams extremely difficult, because, you know, people were eating or tapping the pencils or whatever, and I just couldn't sit exams. So I did an access course, and, you know, got a job being a nursing assistant. And just as I embarked on this midwifery, I wrote this article for the National Autistic Society magazine, because I really wanted to celebrate like who I was at that point, and that, you know, yes, I'd had these challenges, but, you know, look at me, I'm a mother of 5 children, and I'm about to become a midwife. And I was so like proud of myself. And so I became a student, and I was open about being autistic. But actually I felt quite alone, because I was the only autistic or only diagnosed autistic person on my course. And I went into practice on placements, and actually I was the only autistic student, and there was no other, you know, no autistic midwives. And so I felt quite alone, and like nobody really understood what autism is. So I'd say, oh yeah, I'm autistic, but nobody knew what I was talking about. And sometimes I felt that people had these ideas of what autistic people should look like, and they'd say things like, oh, you don't look autistic, or oh, you don't, you know, you don't appear to be autistic. So I kind of like kept quiet a little bit and just tried to fit in with people. And obviously, as other autistic people know, that's really quite exhausting. And something really significant happened, and I was, you know, I wasn't treated very nicely as a student and things, so I just tried to fit in as much as I could. But then one day in my second year, I was working on the postnatal ward with some midwives, and at handover, they always like would go through the board of, you know, this is so and so, this is the birth she's had, you know, this is the support she needs, blah blah blah. And there was a woman who was autistic, and she'd had a second baby, and obviously I won't go into too much detail, but when the coordinator had said, okay, who wants to, you know, who wants to look after this woman, who wants to look after that woman, and nobody wanted to look after this autistic woman. And I was like, oh, like what's going on there? And so I said to my mentor, oh, you know, how can we look after this woman? And she was like, well you can, and I'll support you. And I was like, okay. And I have reflected on that, and I felt that actually there was this kind of maybe fear of the unknown. So oh, this woman's autistic, but we don't know anything about autism, so we don't want to do anything, we don't want to do anything wrong, so we just won't do anything. And so when I met this woman, I realized that she was in a bay with like 4 other women, and she was like extremely anxious when I met her, and she didn't know where to put her nappies, because there was 3 different bins. So which bin do I use? When do we get food? Like, how do we know what food there is? And I just realized, like, she was sat breastfeeding with the curtains up, because someone had said, oh, you're not allowed your curtains closed. And I just felt that if there was 2 things about the situation. I felt that if the midwives had been prepared for that woman coming in, if they'd have known about, certain things about her, how we could have, if the midwives could have been prepared, then they could have perhaps offered her a side room, or, orientated her to the ward more, or told her about the ward, how the ward runs, oh, meal times at this time and this time. And actually, by them being prepared for her experience might have been less anxiety provoking. And so I like, as part of my degree, I started to think about, well, how can we support autistic women? And I came up with the idea of a support plan where women would, at booking, be able to say, write down in this plan that, this is me, this is who I am, these are some of the things I might find challenging, and this is how you can support me. And the idea was that this plan would then go into their hospital notes, so that when the woman's coming into hospital, like to have her baby, the midwife would read this plan and think, okay, this woman finds touch difficult, I'm not going to give her a hug at the door. Or this woman finds noise really uncomfortable, so actually let's get her, let's put her in a side room, let's see if she wants to go in a side room, and those kind of things. So these were like the ideas of, how can we support autistic women? But I still felt like I was a bit of a lone nut. And if I've got time, at the end, I'm going to show you a quick video of what I mean about this lone nut. But there's like an amazing video, and that's how I felt. I felt like I was just this lone nutter who was just going on about autism, but nobody else was on the same page. And so when I qualified, I did go to work at a different trust, and I kept talking about my plans, and nobody had a clue really what I was talking about. And people would say things like, why do we need to do that? Like, why on earth do we need a plan? Like, don't all women get individualized care? And I was like, yeah, but they might need something extra. So I was nominated for a Florence Nightingale scholarship, and I worked to develop these plans. And the plans, like the one plan turned into 3 plans, which it became a pregnancy plan and a birth plan and a postnatal plan. And to get it through into the piloting stage, it had to be learning disability friendly, and that didn't quite sit well with me, because I don't like the idea that autism is always clubbed together with learning disabilities, because whilst some people with a learning disability are autistic as well, that's not the case for everybody. And I think this feeds into that stigma of autistic people have learning disabilities, and they somehow have this deficit in their intellectual knowledge. And it didn't sit well, but actually it was the only way to get past this hurdle and implement something, because I thought that something was better than nothing. And so I presented this at the RCM conference, and I love this picture of me with this midwife, Celia.
Karen, so
Yeah.
can I interrupt? We
Yeah.
can't see that picture yet. Could you click your slideshow if you've moved on, because we've still got the first screen. So I wanted people to be able to see that.
What about
if you start slideshow at the top and then click?
Yeah.
It's
Oh,
not.
what a shame you haven't seen all my pictures.
I think,
Don't know
we
what
can
to
see
do.
the first one, but I don't know if you can click it down.
Let me see that. What about that?
That's not changing it actually.
Oh, let me start again, maybe. Hang on. Oh, what a shame. I've been waffling on. And
We've been listening. I wasn't sure at which point the slides related to. I didn't want to interrupt you when you're in your flow. But whiz through those now. We'll be able to see them hopefully. I'll tell you when you can see them.
let me stop and then do it again. Oh, what a shame. Oh, and I'm nearly out of time as well. Hang on a minute.
We've got time still, I think. We've got sufficient time, absolutely, to see your pictures and make sure we
okay.
we can see that first one again. So if you click on that there. Okay.
And then if can you see a change now?
It's still showing
I
exactly
don't know
the
what to do.
same.
I don't know how to change it, like, or what to do.
Sorry, Karen, you might be
Yeah.
sharing your PowerPoint
Yeah.
window rather than your slideshow window.
I don't know how to do that.
So when you share screen and you see the number of windows come up, you might want to pick slideshow, or in PowerPoint, you can just click onto slide 2 on the side here, and that should bring it up at least in a small way, potentially.
Yeah.
Does it move them on if you? Oh, okay.
There
What
we go.
about
There we go. There we go.
right?
We can see
Okay.
them.
Can I
That's
just
better.
share it like that then, and then at least it's something better than nothing. All right. So yeah, these are obviously some of my like pictures of my children, and this is my husband and my children. And this is me as like a student and when I qualified, and I love this picture of me and my mentor because she was just amazing. She was so nurturing and so kind to me, and she was just a perfect, like, lovely role model. And you know, she just encouraged me like throughout my training, and she really helped me like by, you know, showing me where maps of the hospital and things were as a student. So I've included her because I love her. And the other pictures are, you know, as the Florence Nightingale Award and things. But obviously we went on to implement these plans, but then COVID-19 happened at the same time, so the plans got lost, and I was obviously still wanting to do something, so I started doing a master's in autism, and it was an education master's, and I was the only person who wasn't a teacher, so they just let me do what I liked. And I focused my whole master's on autistic women, and I followed this journey of like, well, what is a good mother? Because, you know, there's this stigma about autistic women. Oh, they need to be referred to social services because how could they be a good mother when they're autistic? And so I just did about, you know, autism and mental health and autism and motherhood. But what I kept coming back to was these narratives from autistic women who say that, you know, maternity care was awful, and it was you know, and like similar to, you know, Emma's story about, you know, that they just were misunderstood. And being an autistic midwife, I knew that there was midwives who gave excellent care. And so I started thinking, well, actually, what is it about these midwives who, you know, give this excellent care, and what is that about, and how can care change for autistic women? So I did my master's I looked at women midwives who either had experience of having autistic children, or I had three midwives who I interviewed. One was a specialist midwife who supports autistic women who has no personal experience of either caring for autistic relatives or autistic, you know, family members. I had a midwife who supports autistic women in practice and has autistic children, and I interviewed a midwife who has autistic children who'd never supported anyone in practice, and I interjected my own story as well. And what I came up with was that the midwives who had personal experience just had this underlying knowledge and understanding of autism that you just don't get from training. You just don't get from doing your 10 minutes of training every 3 years that gives you, you know, this list of facts that are supposed to be autism, that's based on, you know, boys, you know, studies that have been done on autistic boys, and then those, you know, those results are generalized to all autistic people. So I thought, well, actually, how can I use this information to roll it out to all midwives? Like, how can this be shared? Because these midwives have these amazing qualities that just weren't learned through midwifery training. And I felt that actually we need to share women's stories. We need to share autistic women's experiences with midwives, but actually it needs to be facilitated by autistic people and perhaps autistic midwives. So there needs to be this two-pronged approach. There needs to be support for autistic women, but actually it needs to be facilitated by autistic people and autistic midwives. And so I then met Sarah, who is doing a PhD, and she was looking for midwives' experiences. And I was like, okay, I'm just this one person who's doing all of this work. But actually Sarah like brought together like a group of autistic people, and then suddenly I felt like I'd found my tribe, and I was like, oh, I'm not a lone nutter anymore. These other people are talking about the same thing that I am. And you know, we started talking about, well, actually, how can we you know, improve care, and how can we, you know, improve support for people. And I literally saw myself like reflected in these other people. And you know, I met Hayley, and Hayley started, you know, talking to me about, you know, coming in on the book as well, and like writing some content and coming from a midwifery perspective. And that I also felt like I wasn't alone anymore, that actually we were all on the same, we were singing from the same hymn sheet. And this book would then give midwives an autistic perspective of like a perspective of what it's like to be autistic, and here are some things that might support you to support autistic women. And at the same time, I was involved in these films with the local CCG about, you know, how can midwives support autistic women. And we did this short film called It's Okay to Ask. And you know, all of these things are now working together to actually support autistic women. But my original idea was actually, we need autistic midwives. We need autistic women will want to see themselves reflected in the people that are supporting them. And whilst, you know, you could be I can't think of the right word, but you could say, oh, well, all autistic women should be supported by an autistic midwife. That's not what I'm saying. I feel that, you know, there needs to be diversity in the NHS. There needs to be different perspectives. And so I've been working like with the RCM at the moment on a toolkit to support autistic students to be midwives, because you know, yeah, I've lost it a little bit now, but you know, we need a diverse population, needs a diverse NHS. And this book will actually support autistic midwives as well, to support autistic women. And I think I've lost it a little bit now, so I'll probably end in a minute. But I just feel that all of this, like my whole journey to this point, this isn't the end. Like this isn't, and I feel like something brand new is coming out of our work, like with, you know, Hayley and Emma, and also Sarah, and you know, there's other like researchers, everybody, like this is becoming like a really big thing. And you know, it's only got to be good, hasn't it? Like you know, people's perceptions of autistic people are changing. And yeah, I feel like the book is amazing, obviously, and it will support autistic people. in general. I'm going to end because I feel like I've lost it, but I've put like loads of like resources because I was also involved in a project that made bite-sized videos for autistic people. I think Sarah was as well, and Hayley. We made videos to support autistic people navigate maternity care, and I also like have 7 cats, so I have a Instagram page. Like if people love kittens, like look at my page. But have I got time to show this video, Sarah? It's like literally a minute long. I don't know if I'll be able to share it. Let me see if I can, but it's the Lone Nut video.
Yes.
Let me try. Right, so can you see that? Can you see like a YouTube video? Yeah, okay.
If you've learned a lot about leadership and making a movement, then let's watch a movement happen start to finish in under 3 minutes and dissect some lessons. First, of course, a leader needs the guts to stand alone and look ridiculous. But what he's doing is so simple, it's almost instructional. This is key. You must be easy to follow. Now here comes the first follower with a crucial role. He publicly shows everyone else how to follow. Notice how the leader embraces him as an equal. So it's not about the leader anymore. It's about them, plural. Notice how he's calling to his friends to join in. So it takes guts to be a first follower. You stand out, you brave ridicule yourself. Being a first follower is an underappreciated form of leadership. The first follower transforms a lone nut into a leader. If the leader is the flint, the first follower is the spark that really makes the fire. Now here's the second follower. This is a turning point. It's proof the first has done well. Now it's not a lone nut and it's not 2 nuts. 3 is a crowd and a crowd is news. A movement must be public. Make sure outsiders see more than just the leader. Everyone needs to see the followers because new followers emulate followers, not the leader. Now here come 2 more people, then 3 more immediately. Now we've got momentum. This is the tipping point and now we have a movement. As more people jump in, it's no longer risky. If they were on the fence before, there's no reason not to join in now. They won't stand out, they won't be ridiculed, and they will be part of the in crowd if they hurry. And over the next minute, you'll see the rest who prefer to stay part of the crowd, because eventually they'd be ridiculed for not joining. And ladies and gentlemen, that is how a movement is made. So let's recap what we've learned.
And I will stop it there. But I just like this I feel this like sums up my journey a little bit. I felt a bit like a lone nut, and obviously I think that at some point maybe Hayley did and Emma did as well, and maybe Sarah, but actually like coming together, I feel like we are like facilitating a movement now, and it's not just us alone, and that together we can like improve maternity care for autistic people. So I'll stop sharing now and I'll stop talking as well. But yeah, thank you for listening.
Oh, thank you so much, Karen. I absolutely adore that lone nut. I wanted to get up. I could feel myself wanting to get out of my chair, had to sit myself down. I think that it's a really important thing, isn't it? And just I just want to reflect on some of the things that you've shared in your talk. Thank you so much for that. So yeah, the lone nut. I think hopefully some of the work we're doing now together, and the book that you've done together, and the work that other people are doing, will help to reduce some of that emotional labour, some of the impact. Or even if it doesn't reduce the emotional labour, we've got somewhere to go for support and just to share and feel connected, and I think that's really important. It's certainly been really, really important for me, and very emotional for me to find other people with that same interest, and it's been really exciting to see the kind of work that's happening now. So the other thing I wanted to really comment on in your talk, Karen, was how important it is to translate all of this knowledge that we have and we're gathering and finding into very practical outputs. And I think what you've really shown clearly is just, individually on your own, you started doing this and making these things to make a difference, and now collectively, and now working with the RCM and the other work that you've done, just to actually make it, and the book obviously, to make it something very practical. to make a difference. And I think that's really important, and the training that people are doing as well. I also wanted to comment just quickly on the autism and learning disability comment that people have talked about. I think the stats are, and I don't know if this is the latest stats, but I think 4 in 10 autistic people do have a co-occurring learning disability, which means that 6 in 10 don't. So I think it is quite important to be aware of that and be thinking about that, and lots, particularly in NHS trusts, the training is often linked together, and I think that can potentially, I'm not saying it always does cause confusion, but I think it can potentially cause some confusion. And those comments in the chat there about Oliver McGowan training, and I know they do very, sort of clearly differentiate the two things, but I think when you've been to a training course, you kind of make that connection in your head, maybe. So I think it's an important thing to reflect on, and also this importance of the autistic voice in everything that's really happening. I think that's everything I wanted to reflect on there. But we've got time now to open this up for questions. So yeah, and I can see some comments in the chat here. Yes, Autistic Parents UK contributed to the video project, and that, thank you, Ruth, for putting the link into that. That's brilliant. And also Rita's made a comment about the stats. Isn't it likely because when those conditions co-occur together, people are more likely to be identified, and that's the diagnosed figures, not necessarily people self-identified, etc. So I can see those comments in the chat, so please have a look at those. I can't see any questions in the chat at the moment, but I may have missed things. If I have missed them, could someone help me out? But does anyone have any questions you'd like to ask the panel today? I'd love to hear from you. Yes, Rita.
I don't actually have a specific question. I just wanted to say how amazing it has been to hear you all. I haven't had a chance to read the book yet, but I am extra motivated to do that now. I was already, but with the ADHD, it gets hard to get to it. I suppose one of my questions will be, would it translate well into an audiobook, or is it very much kind of a workbook type thing? Because I struggle to read on paper now. Since I have kids, I fall asleep when I pick up a book, but I'm always listening to something as I'm doing other things.
It's a really interesting question. Does anyone want to come in? I saw everybody thinking.
Well, it was something that Hayley and I discussed right at the start, because of accessibility. Like, I almost exclusively listen to audiobooks now. And I'm literally, if there isn't somebody speaking to me, I have earbuds in an audiobook going. If I'm washing the dishes, wherever, so that's where I get my content. I think a lot of it would translate into an audiobook. I don't know if Hayley and Karen agree. There are sections with bullet points and things, and I would say that in terms of the ADHD and kind of getting to read it, I was very conscious of, when we structured the book, having sections, subheadings and bullet points, so it was really digestible, mainly because that's an easier way for me to write as well as like read. So I think that worked for I don't want to speak for the other guys, but I think that worked for all of us, both in the way that we wrote and in the way that we thought people might like to read it. So, whether they will put it into an audiobook or not, it'd have to be a lot of demand, I would assume. But I think they could put most of it in. Not that I'm an expert. What do you guys think?
Because when the question was asked, I thought, oh, actually, you can get software, can't you, that'll read something for you, but I don't know how that works, and that's where my brain was thinking. But I think yeah, I don't know. It's a good question, because I also listen to a lot of audiobooks. Maybe there's a common theme there, but yeah, I think it would make a good audiobook. I think it would be better read by a person and not by a system. That's where my brain was going. Like, yeah, but because obviously, your voice brings the personality to it, doesn't it? But yeah, it is a good question. Doesn't
Yeah,
answer
also with
the question,
things,
but
just thinking with things like bullet points or like recommended pauses for people to journal, a person could actually bring that in even if it's not written down, because when you're looking at it, it becomes obvious that you're supposed to pause and do something there, but a software wouldn't pick up on that.
We actually have very few like images or anything like that in the book, mainly because of publishing. They were kind of like, can you try and keep it to about 10 images? And so the amount of diagrams and images is less than Hayley and I originally envisioned. We kind of scaled them back, but bullet points, I would say, is probably the only other slightly tricky bit. But as Karen was saying, great point, Karen, even without the audiobook, you could use text to speech software, but you would have an AI person kind of maybe not with the inflections and all of that, you know, in the right places. So it'd be like page 102, you know, and just kind of all very AI generated. But you know, that is potentially an option in the meantime. But yeah, it'd be great to have it as a produced audiobook. I agree, I'd love that.
Thank you, everybody. Yeah, some things to consider there. Thank you. Any other questions? Would anyone else like to ask a question?
Hi, I'd like to ask a question. Midwife, so I actually read a lot of reports, and I've been reading the Embrace quite a lot. Obviously, autism doesn't seem to be featured a lot in the reports there. In the reports there, and I was just wondering if it was something you all looking to get to be spoken up more to do with with Embrace in maternity care, because you've brought up about lifespan and medications, and obviously that's quite an important feature of the Embrace. So I was just wondering if there was being more done in regards to that.
It's something that we have discussed briefly as part of Marge Maternity Autism Research Group. But currently we're looking at I don't know how much I can say here. Sorry, can I defer to Sarah or Diane or Karen?
Yeah, I can. So we were I think that the reason it's not in midwifery reports is basically because it's not asked about at a booking. So then if if you don't ask the questions, women aren't supported. But then also it doesn't feature in any statistics because it's not picked up. So actually Diane, who's on the call, has been working with, I can't remember, the Perinatal Institute, I think, to actually get that question added into maternity notes, because then if you ask the question, are you autistic, then you've got to kind of then follow it on, like, how can we support you? And then actually it then might feature in some statistics, and then somebody might think, oh, what are autistic women's outcomes? Because if they're identified as autistic at booking, then you can actually follow their journey, can't you? You can see what what birth they had, or whether they developed postnatal depression. So I think that the reason it's not in reports is because it's not even asked about. But actually Diane's been doing a lot of work to actually get a little bit into the Perinatal Institute notes, a little box about, if they've got autistic relatives, they may be autistic themselves and they may be undiagnosed. But hopefully eventually, as people start becoming more aware, it might be asked at booking, because they ask, can you read and write? But actually they don't ask if you're autistic, or if you have a learning difficulty, or so. Yeah, sorry to cut it short. That's probably why it's not in reports, but hopefully one day it might be.
I think Di's done some great work. Thank you, Karen. But Di's done some great work with trying to encourage that question, and I know it's been put into the green notes. That question's gone in. When I was starting my research, I did freedom of information requests, with to try and find out whether there were any stats held by the NHS for the whole of England at that point about numbers of autistic people using services, and there wasn't anything at that point. That was being looked at, and there was potentially going to be change. I need to refresh it to see if it's changed, but at the time I did my research, it just wasn't held. The stats weren't held. But interestingly, when I, in my previous piece of research for my postgrad diploma, I asked a small number of local trusts, and half of them held the data and half of them didn't. It was a very, very, very small number, so it's not kind of reflective. But they didn't really report on it or do anything particularly with it, just came up in the information. So what we really need is that information. But when we look at the stats that we already know about, we know these people are there, don't we? We're here, we know we're there. So it's going to be really important once that starts to change. Yeah. Di, I don't know if you're here and if you'd like to comment on that. It might be a bit on the spot, or you might not be able to comment at the moment, but if you do want to comment and speak, please do, or pop something in the chat. No, not at the moment, but yeah. Does that answer your question, Emma? Is that okay?
Yes, no, it does. I know because we use BadgerNet, and we've got on the booking system, it is incorporated into learning difficulties, I believe. I know when I've booked some women, they've said we've asked about learning difficulties, and I know I've had to put in, sadly, under there like ADHD. It's been incorporated in that, and that's what I just wondered if it was being reported on. But it's quite interesting, actually. I think there's a BadgerNet Day that's held every year, so I think it might be a question I might bring up there as well, if it's something they're willing to incorporate into how they're building the system, and how they set it up for the booking. So yeah, just there's a way that we're helping mothers rather than hindering, especially if so it's picked up at booking and then it's on the notes, and it's the healthcare professionals that have access to those notes. It's like we have alerts for allergies and other conditions, but we don't seem to have, and obviously perinatal, but then we don't seem to have an alert for this, if that makes sense. So so thank you. It's been very, very eye-opening, this whole talk. It's been fantastic to listen to, and very, very powerful and thought-provoking.
Thank you, Emma.
I was just going to say, Emma, that I work alongside a midwife, a specialist midwife, so I don't get access to BadgerNet, but she does. And what we do is just put an alert on BadgerNet to say that this woman is autistic, has communication and sensory needs. Please look into the notes to find out what they are.
Yeah, that's not something my trust does, but it's actually something to look into. That's great, thank you.
Just raises a little flag.
Yeah,
Sorry,
okay.
can I just make a comment here as well? I think the other thing is, not only are we sort of missing people where they are diagnosed and where they're undiagnosed, but we're also missing people that perhaps don't feel safe to disclose. So that's another important thing, is that we might be missing that data for other reasons as well. So, you know, fabricated illness is a big issue in the community for autistic parents for some. And I think, again, other intersectionality issues can impact on you feeling safe to disclose that you're autistic, or, you know, other conditions and things like that. So moving forward, I think we need to kind of keep that in mind as well, that the figures probably, unfortunately, for some time are going to be slightly skewed or underestimated because of a number of things. But yeah, that's, sorry, just wanted to...
Any other questions? We just see agreement in the Diane has just sent a message. Thank you very much, Diane. This data is not currently being captured in most trusts. Yeah, I think that is probably the case. And yeah, So yeah, Di's aware it's not currently being captured. So I think that piece of work, Diane, if you can hear me, that you've been doing to encourage that going into the booking appointment is just so crucial. And then that flip side of the work to make it a comfortable place, and that what actually happens as a response of that is appropriate is crucial. So anything else? Anybody else would like to ask anything? I don't think I've missed any questions in the chat, have I? Please call me out if I have. And does anybody have anything else that they'd like to share that they haven't had the chance to say? Karen, were you going to say?
Yeah, someone's wrote in the chat, and it's quite a useful comment. So Claire's wrote, I also wonder how the process can be more person-centered and needs-driven as opposed to diagnosis-driven. There will likely be lots of women who struggle but do not know they're autistic, or those who don't feel comfortable disclosing without a diagnosis. And this is like one of the barriers in healthcare, in that a lot of things are diagnosis dependent. So, you can't have reasonable adjustments until, you have a diagnosis, but then it could take, 6 years for somebody to be assessed and be diagnosed. And actually by that time it's too late. So I think midwifery, like coming from a midwifery perspective, I think midwives are quite good at individualizing care. And so I think, but this would then depend on women actually understanding and recognizing their needs. And sometimes you don't recognize, you find something difficult until you're plunged into that situation, and then you don't process it until later on after it's happened. So I think there's a lot of barriers here, isn't there? And it's difficult to know what the answer is, but I think that, as midwives become more aware of that there are women who are undiagnosed or misdiagnosed, or they may find things difficult in that, even just clinical environments can be difficult. But also, I don't know, I think women also may not know they have certain challenges until they're in that situation. And I don't know what the answer is to that. I don't even know where I was going with that, but yeah, I'm going to stop.
I think that's spot on, Karen. And I think where midwives can help with that is midwives have the insight of the kind of things, the range of things that might happen. And particularly if it's somebody's first experience of birth, you don't know what's coming. But I think where midwives have got that expertise, it's making that range of information and all the possibilities available to somebody so they can pre-process that. I think one of the barriers to that is, I've found in my personal experience that people often don't want to share the experience of labour, particularly with somebody that hasn't been through that experience, because they don't want to make it anxiety laden or give you concerns. But for me, actually, I would have really benefited from understanding every potential scenario that might have happened to me, so that I could pre-process it and then understand what was happening in the moment. Rather than have to react and try and process at the time it was happening. And I know that's going to be different for different autistic people, but for me that would have been helpful. So a midwife to be able to say, how much information do you think would be helpful? Are you typically a person that likes to have a range of scenarios and to understand lots of different things? And if that had been offered to me, I would have said, yes, tell me everything that might happen potentially. Or not everything, you can't cover everything, but a range of things. And then that would have really helped me. So it's that kind of insight and expertise that health practitioners, health professionals can bring, I think.
I just want to agree with you on that, Sarah, really, and also say that, there were so many little things that would have made a massive difference for me. So one example is that I nearly drowned myself by drinking, and it's not hyperbole, I literally blacked out and lost my vision by drinking too much water before my second ultrasound scan. Because during the first scan, they'd sort of said, oh, we told you to drink water, but the letter had come and said, drink some water and try not to go to the loo before you scan. So I drank sort of like a 500 ml bottle of water, which was a lot for me. hadn't gone to the loo, and I got there and they kind of chastised me and were like, why didn't you do what we told you? And your bladder isn't full enough. Go out to the waiting room, which was packed with people and really loud. Drink as much as you can and do not go to the toilet before we call you. So I drank about 6 cooler things of water and then didn't go to the loo and was in agony. So I thought, right, they didn't call me in for an hour. So the next time I thought, right, that isn't happening again for my 5-month scan. So I drank a 2-litre bottle of water, it kind of almost like in one go, to try and avoid that situation. And I was on my own in the house waiting for my partner to come home from work and pick me up. And my vision started just tunneling in and going black. And then I kind of vomited water everywhere. And luckily I was okay. But I didn't even know you could drown from drinking too much water. So that was like really dangerous if I'd had. And then I got there and she said, oh, you didn't need to drink water for this one. Your baby's bigger now. I was like, oh, man. And then the other thing was after I gave birth, I had stitches that were really painful. And I was also very exhausted. And every time that I needed to go for a wee, I had to get in the bath and have the water in the bath to kind of dilute it because it was too painful otherwise. And I was so exhausted from coming in and out the bath. I thought, right, well, the best thing I can do is drink less so that I don't need to go to the toilet as much. And I became dehydrated and my milk supply started to dry up. And, then the midwife sort of said to me, well, did nobody tell you about a flannel or a little jug of water? And I was like, no. And it didn't occur to me because my brain takes the most indirect path sometimes in practical things. So, those two things were they had quite significant detrimental impact. And they were tiny, tiny considerations, So I think what I'm trying to say is that, yeah, we want to make big change, but even one little change is huge, isn't it? I think was where I was going with that. Sorry.
I think you're absolutely right. And again, I have a similar example in my research data of that, where there was somebody had to stay overnight in hospital for some significant amount of time. And they shared with me that that they were really struggling with the sensory environment and struggling with people coming in and out all the time. They were having medication and blood pressure tests and lots of things happening. And one of the midwives sort of noticed that this person wasn't coping particularly well and came in and sat down and said, let's spend 5 minutes looking at your schedule and see if we can align any of these activities. Let's have your meds and your blood pressure at this time. They just rejigged it slightly and gave the written version to the person. And the person said to me that made the difference between them being able to stay in hospital and not stay in hospital, because the sensory environment was reduced. There were fewer people coming in and out. They had a plan. They could see what was happening and what was coming. And it just changed the whole experience. And that's
sorry.
right.
I was gonna say, like, I had past trauma already, so I'm quite hyper vigilant, and also with my home, like, I don't like knocks on the door or anything like that as well. I've got cameras on my doors and things. So being in hospital, people were in and out of the room constantly. So it was like the kind of, when my partner says the Virgin engineer is going to be there anytime from 8 until 6, and you're like this all day. That's what it was like being in hospital for me. And I remember by day 2 crying and begging to go home and them saying, you're not coping, you haven't got the feeding yet, we don't want to release you till tomorrow. And I was just kind of going, I can't rest, like there's no rest, people are in and out, and not, they might have been in and out 10, 12 times a day, but I was constantly on alert because I didn't know when it was going to happen, and also that I felt that they were hostile, so I was even more hyped up. So I think it's again, you don't feel safe is a key thing there, isn't it?
Absolutely. And absolutely, Emma. I've got a comment here from Ruth saying, when I had my first, I left hospital with a dislodged vertebrae because I could not stay there. Mm-hmm. So that's how challenging the hospital environment can be for an autistic person, and I think it's really important, isn't it, to be aware of that. I suspect we could talk about this. I know I could talk about this for some days. We could do a whole day's workshop and still not run out of topic, I'm sure. But we need to come to an end, I think. I can see Rita's got a question. I think we've got time for a final question or comment, and then
it was just a very quick comment. I think it is worth educating women about the Equality Act. I've helped quite a few clients put in claims. I had a client in particular that was coming to mind who stopped attending her cancer treatments because the receptionists in their GP clinic refused to turn off the radio. And I mean, sometimes it's really basic human kindness, isn't it? But if people are coming in armed with knowledge, and a lot that came out was people being told they're not allowed to do things, they don't have permission to have the birth they want. So sometimes casually dropping in the Equality Act, because it comes with serious financial repercussions if you sue under the Equality Act, it tends to unblock a lot of processes, in my experience, and it's magically a lot of problems disappear after you mention that. It's educating about reasonable adjustments, isn't it? And you don't need a diagnosis for that, but it helps.
Really good point, Rita. Thank you so much for mentioning that. And Hayley's mentioned here, Birthrights have excellent resources on that too. And I think on that note, we probably need to finish up. Thank you so much, Hayley, Emma, and Karen. That was such a really fascinating batch of presentation. So thank you for sharing that, and good luck with the book. We look forward to hearing more about how it's all going and how it's being received. Thank you everybody for listening, and thank you for all your comments and input today. We really appreciate it, and take care everybody.
Thanks everyone. Bye.
Bye.